I am Elle Siegel. I am Trails Conservancy's Advocacy Outreach Director based in very, very hot DC. Thank you all again for joining us today for our session on advocating for active transportation, introducing Rails to Trails Conservancy's reauthorization agenda. We look forward to having this discussion with you. Next slide, please. So a quick agenda. So in a moment, I'm going to kick things over to Kevin Mills, our Vice President of Policy, to talk a bit about the current events and political context of the moment that we are in. And then we will talk a little bit more in specific about RTC's reauthorization agenda and actions. And then I will talk more specifically about what you can do to advocate for trails in this moment. So with that, next slide, and over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Elle, and thanks everyone for joining today. So let me give you a little overview on RTC's perspective. We're a really pragmatic organization. We like to get things done. We're optimistic. We really see potential in various places and look to insert ourselves where we can have maximum impact. And we really see a lot of momentum in terms of all the robust investment that there's been in our movement in the last several years, as well as a pro-trail culture shift going on nationwide, where people are recognizing that trail networks are essential community assets. And that's going on, though, in a context where we also have to be aware that there's a federal policy backlash. So we need to do a lot of work at the federal level to protect all the important programs that support trail and active transportation networks. But we also need to work at the state and local levels to maximize impact. And just one example of that is last fall, there was tremendous success with ballot measures at the state and local level. And so that's an opportunity to be on offense, even as maybe we'll be on defense in some other contexts. So from a communication standpoint, really looking to build visibility for our movement. We got to think about how we deploy the right messengers and the messages to meet this moment. Next slide, please. So the administration context. So from day one of this administration, it's been a very fluid and uncertain policy environment. We've seen assertions of unprecedented executive power. And the method we typically see is a broad freeze on funding of a certain sorts, like on infrastructure bill funding. Then a review of grants, policies, and programs for whether they align with those principles. And that can go on for a long time. We're still seeing, even though this happened on day one, we're still seeing many, many grants, still under review months later. And then a declaration that they would revise those to align with their priorities and that they could take back unobligated dollars. Next slide, please. So when the Department of Transportation Secretary Duffy came into office, he pretty quickly gave two key directives. One was resetting principles and standards, saying, well, small and local projects are not really the federal role. We could amend existing grant agreements. Cultural issues would influence our priorities. We want to make sure money gets to places with high marriage and birth rates. We don't want it to go to places that have mask or vaccine mandates or that don't cooperate with the administration on immigration. They did articulate some values that they were for that we see as opportunities for a dialogue. So we want communities to be safer for children and families. We want there to be access to job opportunities. We want high quality of life. These are all things where trail and active transportation networks can make a really important contribution. And so that becomes, part of the dialogue, is that we're helping you achieve your goals by doing these things. This also came along with what's called a rescission order, where they said, well, we would initiate action against any grant, policy, or program that was inconsistent with the administration's policies. And then some weeks later, in March, another memo came out that reiterated many of these things I just mentioned. And then it added to the list of things that were subject to scrutiny, bicycle infrastructure. And in particular, it called out recreational trails and shared use paths as key examples of that. And it said, we won't just go after unobligated or unsigned grants, but also partially obligated grants. We could cancel them. We could renegotiate their scope. Next slide. So RTC has really been working since early January on a strategy to blunt what we saw coming at the, which is we're calling a clawbacks, campaign, that the administration is looking to take money awarded over the last several years and perhaps pull back some of it. And one of the things we have to work with here is that there's some leverage in the fact that this is pretty unprecedented, and it violates expectations of the grant recipients and of the communities that had worked so hard to get these grants, that were relying on them to make their communities better, and that were investing their own resources in moving these projects forward. So, so we look to activate partners at the local, state, and federal level to influence elected officials at all those levels. And for months, really, we've had allies, kind of sounding the alarm, making the case for how important these projects are to their communities. And we know that that's been heard loud and clear by the administration. And one of the reasons we know that is that we, some point into this effort, developed a sign-on letter for local elected officials and local chambers of commerce, where we had 175 sign on. We sent it to the secretary, and then we went in and met with the political leadership of the department and talked about these issues. And so we know that you have been heard as you've done all this outreach on behalf of your projects. So some of the other things we're doing as we go through this work is, making sure we're doing all doing a great job of making the case for this. We're having webinars like this one today, partner updates regularly by email, and so on. The direct advocacy is just an example. In the wake of that bicycle infrastructure memo within DOT, about 3 weeks after that, Secretary Duffy appeared at a hearing before the Senate, and we asked senators to ask him questions about the bike memo, and they ended up having an interesting dialogue where Secretary Duffy admitted bicycling is, yes, can be transportation, it can be an important part of the picture, and so on. So walking it back a little bit, at least in the eyes of Congress. And then I met the week after that with some of his team to talk about this, and they assured us that no, we're not after trails, and but they have concerns about cycle tracks taking lane capacity from cars, and so no matter how we argue that, they do not seem persuadable that that's also important infrastructure. So we have to note that and realize that's part of the challenge we have before us, is convincing them of all the parts of an active transportation network are important. Next slide, please. So now let's pivot to Congress. So reauthorization is the main event here, and that's what we promised you we would talk about today. And the reason this is so important is every 5-6 years, Congress passes what they essentially call a Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. And this sets the nation's policies, program, and funding priorities that relate to all sorts of transportation that occurs on land, like cars, trucks, buses, trains, walking, biking, so on. And Congress has already initiated this process for the next cycle. The current bill runs through September of next year, and they've said, well, we want to move quickly. And in fact, it was surprisingly early that they started, and they've already gone through the process of collecting input and are in some ways off to the races here. We also just mentioned, and I'll come back around to it, is appropriations is another front that goes on at the same time, is that every year Congress has to work at putting together a budget, and that impacts this one key program for us, the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. Next slide, please. So for the reauthorization, I'm calling this the Back to the Future reauthorization. So in the end of 2021, when the last reauthorization passed, we saw that it was setting federal goals surrounding climate, safety, and equity, that they wanted to foster more multimodal transportation with more mobility options like walking and biking, and that they wanted to initiate new programs and have a larger direct federal role. Now, that's not to say, this is all relative. It's not to say formula dollars, or those dollars that are given to the states to spend, that still dominates the picture. But there were more opportunities than ever before for direct federal grants that could show what it looks like when you set different priorities. And so lots of exciting things happened with those opportunities. Now the committee chairs in each chamber have declared that their aims going into this reauthorization are things like giving more dollars to the states and giving them more flexibility, so less accountability. Want to reemphasize building of highways. They want to there's some of them giving reference to Project 2025, where among other things it says that walking and biking are not the federal role, and that we ought to devolve responsibility for those things to states and localities. And they are interested in consolidating programs, although I will note that the last time we had a consolidation-oriented reauthorization in 2012, the two main programs that support our work at the state and regional level, the transportation alternatives and the recreational trails programs, were consolidated together. So there maybe is less pressure for that this time for those. Next slide. So our reauthorization agenda, so let's dig into that. So I think of this in three primary buckets. The first are the dedicated programs that are solely about trails, walking, and biking. So there's the transportation alternatives set aside. This is the nation's largest source of funding for trails, walking, and biking. And the recreational trails program, which supports the building and maintaining of recreational trails. And then there's the active transportation infrastructure investment program, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And then and the first two are implemented in the states, and the last one by the Federal Highway Administration. Then there are the federal discretionary grants, and these are things like it was called RAISE in the last administration, has now been renamed again as BUILD. There's also the Reconnecting Communities program, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. Things like that have been very exciting development for our movement in the last few years. These are the sorts of programs that are going to get heavy scrutiny in Congress this time, with an effort to eliminate them or consolidate them. And what we've been doing is saying they serve an important purpose in fostering innovation, showing a better way to do things. And then we want Congress this time to be more purposeful and intentional about using what's learned from these programs to improve formula programs, because that's where most of the money is. And then we also, have seen these programs be used to increase mobility options, and we want that to continue. And we also think these programs can be important in filling gaps where formula programs in the states don't necessarily do that good a job. Like if you had an expensive bridge connecting two states over a river, each state is worrying about its own interests, and here you've got something that is interstate and expensive, and so it can fall between the cracks. So these are the kinds of things that we think these programs can do particularly well, and we're trying to get Congress on board with that. And then finally, for the formula programs that run through the states, we think it's really important that there be accountability to the federal goals, that if the federal government says, we've got a problem with traffic deaths, 42,000 people a year dying on the roads, and an ever-increasing number of pedestrians and bicyclists is not acceptable, we've got to do better. We want that to be something that we hold the state's feet to the fire on, and that they're expected to improve safety outcomes if they want the money to keep flowing. Next slide. So recent things RTC has been doing on this front is, we obviously working with partners at all levels, building consensus and collaborating. We've developed and promoted our formal policy proposals for the reauthorization. We've provided formal verbal and written recommendations to the committees in Congress on this. And we've engaged local, state, and national allies to amplify these requests. And then there was a process that wound up recently where members of Congress were asked to submit to the committee their priorities for the process. And we persuaded a number of representatives and senators to submit our requests as among their priorities. And that's very important to our prospects to get these ideas taken seriously. Next slide. All right, so now appropriations. I noted earlier that the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program is critical to us. It was just created in 2021 in the last reauthorization, with the idea that the existing programs have built lots and lots of critical projects, but that we needed larger strategic grants that would enable us to put together all the pieces and connect walking and biking routes to routine destinations within a region and then longer distance connections between communities, and that we needed bigger investments to do that. So this was a program that was authorized in the last bill at 200 million a year, but it was subject to annual appropriations, and those have proven very, very hard to get. So we've had one small but successful round of grants that came out at the beginning of January. And but we see this next round of the fiscal 26 budget as our last chance under the original authorization to get this money out there, doing good and showing what the program can do on the ground. And so we're hitting up advocacy targets, hitting what they call dear colleague letters, where members of Congress sign on and say, I like this, I want this. And then but we see this as an uphill battle, but it's also an important one for setting ourselves up for reauthorization and having this critical newer program that's going to frankly be vulnerable in a consolidation environment, and make sure that it's queued up for success. Next slide. So now that's it for the policy. Let's talk a little bit about our outreach or movement building strategy. So it's all about relationships. And right now, with Republicans in control of both chambers of commerce and the White House, we've got to do a lot of extra relationship building with Republican leaders. We do this, you can't be with everybody. So we do this by doing geographic targeting. We think about who are going to be key decision makers in committees, and who do we know in those places that can help us build this relationship. And so it's done over time and very intentionally. We want to cultivate the messengers and partners who can carry influence with those conservative decision makers. We find that folks back home are really critical in this process, right? Like, obviously, what do people care about, the voters back home, as well as more broadly, conservative influencers and the political allies, sometimes business interests and what have you, have been important allies in getting these messages through. RTC also is working with hundreds of trail networks around the country, and these are important allies in terms of doing this outreach. And so we look for where there's overlap between the geography of interest and where there's important trail networks forming. And we also have an initiative called Change Makers for Trails, where we're looking particularly to empower our grassroots and grass tops friends to engage effectively in this process. Next slide, please. So finally, and I'll hand it back to Elle. We'll talk a little about communication. So here we really want to shift the narrative, right? Like if you've got a narrative out there that maybe this is nice to have, but it's not the federal role, we need to counter the pushback on this. And so we're looking to be very pervasive and proactive in our storytelling. We're working through the media and through direct advocacy. And we want to take advantage of that culture shift I noted in terms of recognizing that trails and active transportation are essential community assets. And we want to cement that picture in people's minds so that the narrative isn't, well, this is nice, but there are more important things for us to be doing, to this is one of the things we really need to be doing and doing well. So part of how we do this is showcase Republican leadership on trails and active transportation, show that it's lifting up some things that those communities really care about. We have to elevate stories of impact on topics that carry weight with these decision makers, things like economic impact and safety. And then we want to be persistent and pervasive. We think about political geography, think about the messengers, think about the media and the media outlets that people listen to, right? And make sure that we're reaching the right people in the right ways. And so with that, let me turn back to Elle.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. So we want to talk a bit about your role. So we are a small but mighty team here and want to have your help in making sure we have the largest impact possible this reauthorization season. So next slide, please. So there are several different ways you, our key partners, can help with this advocacy and help getting the message out to important decision makers. We have three categories here. The first is going to be everyday advocacy, talking about the importance of trails walking and biking on social media, talking to your friends, sharing your network, sharing to your network, going out on the trail. So those are going to be things that you can do every day with friends, with family, with colleagues, fairly easy and introductory, I will say. Community advocacy. We're thinking about events and activities where you live, helping organize supporters through petitions, attending community events and community meetings. So that's another chunk of different ways to get involved. And then the third way, the sort of advanced opportunity here is the direct advocacy, outreach directly to your elected officials via email, via phone, letters, in person, in one-on-one conversations, letters to the editor, op-eds. So no matter sort of your starting point in advocacy for Trails Walking and Biking, there's different ways to get involved. And we're going to touch mostly on community advocacy and direct advocacy, but we'll talk a little bit about all three. So next slide, please. So engaging local leaders for federal impact. So you might have seen on the last slide that we talk a bit about local elected officials, and you might be wondering, why are we talking about local officials when Congress writes the next transportation bill? The reason for that is that local and state officials really are themselves important constituents in the district. They are able to trickle upward, if you will, and have the ability to reach members of Congress in an easier way than you or I often could. They also are on the ground seeing the direct impact of this funding and how positively it impacts communities across the country. So they are able to see the progress on the ground and be able to experience it with their constituents, and then communicate that upwards to the folks who are creating the funding and the policy that will indicate where we go in the future with this infrastructure. So we encourage you to engage your local and sometimes state officials to discuss active transportation, for them to share stories about the impact that this is having in their districts and their cities and municipalities, and then to amplify that on social media. So you'll see here the mayor of Spokane talking about an experience they had at Celebrate Trails Day, and how that is really helpful when we're thinking about engaging Senator Murray, who's the senator of Washington, where Spokane is located. So next slide, please. So one way that we are hoping to have that happen is by engaging our elected officials who are supportive of active transportation funding by asking them to pledge their support. And we will be gathering a list of really robust list of supporters across the country to be able to highlight the importance of active transportation funding in their regions. And so we ask you to use this as you're interacting with your local and state officials in your communities. You're able to use this as a QR code, so you can simply use your phone and hover over the code on your screen, and it'll come up on your phone, or it is in the chat here for you to utilize at a later time. But either way, we love your support in interacting with those state and local officials to help have a large list of folks who clearly express their support for federal funding for trails, walking, and biking. Next slide, please. So some additional opportunities for direct advocacy. So the time is now to meet with members of Congress. Officials are hearing a lot about various issues. They're balancing a lot of different things, whether it be current budget bills, appropriations, or other matters. And we need to make sure that this stays top of mind for all elected officials, particularly the ones that Kevin mentioned that are in these key areas for us. And really continuing that outreach over the summer is going to be critical, especially while a lot of members of Congress are spending more time in their districts in July and August. One thing to really emphasize here is that we are here to be your partners in making these meetings happen. We've already been working with a lot of our partners and our members to have successful meetings in the district, and we want to work with you to make that possible as well. So next slide, please. So some stories of success here. So I want to talk for a brief moment about the power of in-district outreach and mapping relationships, and really emphasize the fact that all politics is local. So some of the incredible champions we've built, particularly in conservative areas, have been in unexpected places. So we have a great story of having built an ally with a member of Congress based on knowing their neighbor, and their neighbor being able to have a different kind of relationship where they were able to express the benefits neighbor to neighbor about this infrastructure. So I want to point to that as sort of mapping your relationships, thinking outside the box about who you may know who may be able to engage with these different decision makers, and how you can get creative with thinking about people like neighbors, and particularly in rural areas, in smaller towns, you never know who you're going to know. So really encourage you to do that thinking as we're trying to map successful relationships. And then the power of in-district engagement. We had a similar example of finding our way to meet a childhood friend of a member of Congress, and they were able to text the member, express excitement about ATIP and the importance of having that dedicated funding focused on connectivity. And then we were able to follow up that text message with a lot of outreach from different organizations in the district, as well as some constituents, to express their continued support for ATIP. And that member of Congress then did express support for the program. So I just want to indicate the power of this advocacy and what is accomplished when we all work together as RTC and our partners to make this happen. And then on the other side of things, it's really important to reinforce support for people who we already perceive to be our champions. So we've been working with our Changemaker for Trails program, which Kevin mentioned earlier, which is our grassroots initiative, working with our members to engage them in advocacy and bring them into reauthorization engagement. And we've had a lot of opportunities to thank our champions, people who have been drafting legislation and sponsoring legislation for years, folks who may not need to have that convincing kind of collaborative meeting, but I think goes really far. So being able to do that and reinforce their support is really important, as well as for folks who have been champions but are again kind of balancing all of those different priorities, whether it be other types of transportation programs that they're hearing about constituents from, or other completely separate issues that are taking up their attention. We want to make sure that they are hearing from us, that support is being reinforced, that this is important to their district. So all of the above is important, and there are a lot of great success stories, as we've alluded to, that you all will be critical in helping us with over the coming months. So next slide, please. So if you are interested in working with us to contact your elected officials, your members of Congress, here's another great QR code. You can go ahead and hover over the screen, or I believe we're going to put it in the chat as well. But we want to be your partners in having in-district meetings. We're excited to be a resource in building agendas and helping with outreach emails and connecting you to other partners in the area. So we really see ourselves as your partners in making these meetings happen, and they're already happening. So if anyone's on here who's been having some of these meetings, thank you for all that you've done already. Next slide, please. So I want to talk really quickly, reinforcing some of the messaging that Kevin referenced earlier. So why trails matter. So in these conversations, we really want to double down on the fact that this is essential infrastructure with a real economic impact. So $34 billion in economic activity annually, and that can be more than quadrupled as systems are connected. So essential infrastructure and economic impact being two huge things to emphasize in conversations. And it's more than the economy. It's about quality of life, and it's about safety and vibrant places to live. So those are some of the key messages that you've probably heard in some of these other webinars that you've been attending from RTC, but we say them repeatedly because they're really important to make sure that they come across and that they're emphasized. Next slide. And then what is at stake? This is both, for us to chat about, but also for members, conversation you have with elected officials. So meeting demand and making progress. In recent applications, we really saw this demand come through. For ATIP, it was every $40 requested, there was only $1 available. So that 40-to-1 ratio really speaks to the continued demand for dedicated funding for connected active transportation systems and trail networks. And regional trail and active transportation systems are in development across the country. And there are maps on our website, they may be in the chat soon, that really demonstrate the continued progress to build and plan these networks, but they need the funding to make them happen. And unfortunately, without funding, there are plans in place, but there's no ability to build or maintain those trails. So that is incredibly important to showcase in conversations is we have these plans, but we need the funding to build and maintain them. Keeping people safe is another important thing to think about because unfortunately, every year thousands of people are killed walking or biking due to unsafe conditions. And something that I think is incredibly helpful to emphasize is that studies show that bikeable and walkable communities are safe for everyone, including people in cars. And then again, boosting the economy, just to double down on the statistics here, for every $1 invested in trails, $1.72 is generated annually. So that return on investment is just undeniable. Next slide, please. So your action plan, and then I think we're moving to questions in a minute, and I think we already have a couple. 4 things that you can do to build movement and shift our narrative over the coming weeks. Invite your local and state and federal officials to join you out on the trail and amplify it on social media. So as I mentioned, members of Congress are more likely to be in the district this summer during recess in July and in August. So it's a great time to invite them out on the trail, as well as your local and state officials. Again, as I said, that trickle up effect where they are able to experience the infrastructure more in a more hands-on way, and then emphasize the importance of it to their members of Congress. And then ask those local and state elected officials to sign our pledge and express their support and help build this movement of officials across the country expressing support. Engaging some agency officials to demonstrate the far-reaching support for active transportation networks is another great way to engage an audience that is really important to making the most out of the dollars spent. And then meeting with those elected officials. We want to be your partners in making that happen. So please fill out our form and we will be in touch on next steps. Next slide, please. So with that, we're going to move to Q&A, and I think we already have a couple here. Let me see.
I mean, I see one. If you want me to throw it out, and we can both give it a whiff.
Sure.
So I see one that says, with so much going on in Congress right now, what will it take to make trails and other walking and biking infrastructure a priority? And to this, let me start by saying people matter a lot, right? If you're an elected official, you care about what your constituents think, and there are some constituents, frankly, count more than others, and you just want to think about who might have influence with that member of Congress. But I also care about impacts, and so if the more persuasive you can be about the difference that this infrastructure is making on the ground in your community, the more persuasive you'll be. And one of the places, if you think about congressional staff, where this can be expressed most potently, is that members of Congress have district staff members, and those folks are responsible for having their finger up in the air, understand the radar up, whatever you want to express it, to understand what people are care about back home, right? And so an elected official is really expected to care about what the constituents care about. And so if you assert that this is really important for you in the community, and you do that in a persuasive way, and do that, you can reach in person and have an in-person relationship ongoing with those district staff, you can have quite an impact, right? I would say when you get to DC, the staff is more siloed. There's a staff member who's assigned transportation issues, for instance, and then then members have committee assignments, and so there are going to be certain members who, by the nature of their job description, need to care about this issue more than others, and that's where some of the targeting comes in. But if your member is on one of those key committees, then you know that it's, you know, that they've got a greater responsibility to make policy in this area, and that that the stakes are even higher for you to make sure they know how much this infrastructure means to your community. So, Al, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add that it's a yes and not an either or. I mean, I think the engagement in DC is incredibly important. The engagement in districts is incredibly important. We want this to be it's a whatever other way to it's a marathon, not a sprint, whatever sort of other ways to express the longevity and the importance of continued outreach. It's going to be a consistent thing that we're going to be working on this over the coming months. And the more you can engage members from a district perspective, if you're able to come to DC or work with partners like us in DC, that's great. If you're able to amplify on social media, that is incredibly important. Community events are important. So the drumbeat, the continued outreach is going to help emphasize this as a lot of other issues get elevated as well. Another question here. What recommendations or toolkits would you recommend for making the argument internally within one's organization to follow these strategies? And I think something to think about is, let me think a little bit more about that. Thinking about kind of where there is alignment with your mission of your organization and where trails reach people. I think one thing that we're really fortunate is that trails reach people in so many different ways. There are people who think about this from a safety perspective. There are people who think about this from a public health perspective. There are people who think about this recreationally. There are people who go to work on trails. So finding the right entry point and connection point, I think, is helpful. We have partners that approach this from very different angles. Kevin, I don't know if you have some initial thoughts about sort of internal dialogue around advocacy for these issues.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. I think it really is a matter of connecting up the mission or priorities of a given organization with the benefits that this infrastructure is providing to them and their community. And so for instance, our friends working locally on safe routes to school, well, we're promoting programs that provide infrastructure that make it safe and convenient to walk or bike to routine destinations, including schools. So there's alignment there. But you can focus in on the aspect of it that's most important to your organization, if that's helpful. And same as if the advice for external advocacy is storytelling is very potent, it's the way humans are wired to think, that could also be true. That could also be true internally. And I always think of some favorite stories I have about like how that impact's been articulated in a way where it really started to connect for people. So for instance, in Detroit, the mayor says, well, this is my, the Joe Louis Greenway is my #2 priority. Well, Detroit has a lot of issues to manage. It's quite remarkable that he would say that, right? So jobs is first, and that trail is second. And the trail is second because for decades, mayors in Detroit have had trouble figuring out how do you connect hard-hit neighborhoods to economic opportunity and jobs. And now all of a sudden this greenway comes along, and it's something that's being enthusiastically supported by the adjoining neighborhoods, and that accomplishes that gives people a safe and convenient way for them to get from where they live to where they need to go in a city where sometimes you have to get on multiple buses and be an hour and a half, 2 hours each way to a job in the suburbs. And it's not very practical, right? And so you have to be a little bit more creative about, how do you provide those opportunities? So that's just, one story that made an impression on me. But you will have your own, and they can be very potent.
Kevin, I think we have another question someone observed, or I guess this inspired question, someone observed in the chat that many rail trails and multi-use trails are located in more conservative areas. And so the question kind of stemming from that is, how can we leverage the impact of trails in these more conservative places to build more support in Congress? Kevin, do you have any initial thoughts?
Well, just that all politics is local, and maybe another one of those stories I like is when a trail was completed from Washington D.C. to Pittsburgh, RTC led a ride where hundreds of people, went on that trail. And one night we were camping in Cumberland, Maryland, in the panhandle of Maryland, where it had been a coal mining town and had been on kind of hard times economically for decades at that point. And when the Great Allegheny Passage was finished and connected up to the C&O Canal, so that you go 340 miles, all off road, and knew that there'd be a lot of tourism around that. The mayor came out and said, "This is the biggest thing that's happened in this town in 35 years, and it's the biggest encampment since the Civil War." And it was a big applause line and all that. But anyway, but the point is, here in a small town in a rural area with a lot of conservative sentiment, they were seeing this as their economic development savior, right? And that, that's powerful. This is not just, oh, hey, now I have a place to go out on Sunday when I feel like going on a bike ride. They were seeing it as really fundamental to coming back as a community. And in fact, it has. If you look at it years later, there's way more economic activity around, around that trailhead than there ever was. And so I just think making sure that we realize those stories are out there, and that it is improving the quality of life, in conservative communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think the beautiful thing about economic development, safety, and quality of life is they can affect everyone, regardless of your political affiliation or whether you live in a rural, suburban, or urban context. And so I think that especially things like safety, there is a crisis in all types of communities for sometimes different reasons, but safe, connected, active transportation networks provide options for everyone. So we've seen a lot of legislation trying to address safety for families from very conservative members of Congress. So I think that is a really potent argument. We've seen the Secretary of Transportation, who is, a Republican from, I believe, a fairly rural area of Wisconsin, emphasizing the importance of families writ large, but also safety for children and families. And so that is something that I think will be incredibly important and well received to appeal to folks, as well as the other the economic development and quality of life pieces. It looks like we have a couple other questions trickling in here. Have we mentioned kind of engagement, Kevin, with Secretary Duffy. Have we heard from his team or others in Congress around prioritizing trails generally, and this person specifically asking about areas of persistent poverty? So any insights you have there?
Well, I mean, one thing I'd say is we didn't note, but in the initial memos that came out, the key targets of those initial memos in terms of things that they wanted to move away from were diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and anything related to climate. And so there's been a bit of say a very different perspective on things like how do we ensure equitable access to these resources. That being said, there are plenty of rural communities that have persistent poverty, and so this question is an excellent one, where there could be a shared interest in improving those conditions. One thing I will say is a positive indication is there was a program called the Thriving Communities Program, which was about providing technical assistance to communities to gain access to transportation infrastructure funding. and RTC worked with a lot and with a rural cohort of communities on how they could better access all these programs. And so though that program was not stalled or stopped, and it is continued and is winding up what it's in the middle of now. And so that might be indicative of some openness to the fact that that really is an issue. And I think that also could be an interesting part of the dialogue with the Republican leadership during the reauthorization, that that many of their communities have had challenges in accessing federal resources because of limited capacity. So we think that it's a promising piece of the dialogue.
Perfect. I'm not sure if we have any other questions right now. I guess while we're waiting to see if we get any more, Kevin, do you want to say a little bit more about, I mean, the time is now to engage, and I think, do you want to say anything about sort of where this stands in Congress and sort of
Sure.
next steps there, and then we can kind of wrap up?
Yeah. So it was fairly recently that the deadline passed for members of Congress to tell the committee what they cared about in this reauthorization. And our understanding is that the committee staff are, in over their heads, reviewing all that input and seeing what that tells them about, what different members want in the process, and what themes might come to the fore. So that's a kind of a quiet phase that's happening right now. It's partly quiet because that's a lot of work, and it's partly quiet because Congress is really busy right now with what's called a reconciliation bill, or it's been probably noted in the press most often as the big beautiful bill. And this is really taking up a lot of Congress's bandwidth. And so aside from the committee people, who I'm sure are just busy, using all of that input on transportation as their nighttime, their bedtime reading, most of the people in Congress who don't have that specific responsibility are really focused on these other things right now. So that being said, it is a moment in time where that input's been received, but they haven't yet locked in on positions. And so if you want to influence how they're thinking about these things prior to when this starts to gel, if you will, this is a really good time for them to hear back home. And the other thing I would say in that regard is that there's always an August recess where they go home. And so given that all politics is local, and you're busy with all of your good work on the ground in their districts and states, if you can kind of get your messages through to them when they're back home in August, that's always a time when their ears are open to what are their constituents thinking about.
Perfect. And we have one question that did come in that I think would be, it's not necessarily related to reauthorization, but I think it's just always a good one to think about. Someone from Texas saying they're asking if we have advice on leveraging local dollars to chase federal dollars. So Kevin, any thoughts there? And then we'll probably wrap.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a great question. Because there were so many new opportunities in the last reauthorization, the thing we heard maybe more than anything from our friends all around the country is that they were really feeling challenged in meeting match requirements. Typically with a federal transportation project, you need to come up with at least 20% of the money from the local or possibly state level. And that can be a real challenge. So the places that can come up with those dollars or even more, obviously are have a bit of an advantage in terms of being able to say that we're ready to to line up all the pieces to get the project done. So that's absolutely an opportunity. I am always resolute in saying the way infrastructure gets done is a healthy federal, state, and local partnership. And so everybody has to have some kind of skin in the game to really make these things happen.
And I'll just add on the note of, conservative places that we've kind of talked about, supporting trails. We've seen states across the political spectrum have that local support, that state level support. So we have some great blogs and resources on our website that highlight that. There's great examples to replicate. So don't reinvent the wheel if you're interested. With that, we're almost at time, and we want to thank you so much. We will be sending around the recording of this as well as our slides over the coming days. So we look forward to continuing the conversation. Please send around the local elected pledge and fill out our form if you're interested in meeting with your members of Congress. And if we don't see you, we hope you stay cool during this crazy heat wave. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.